old saying in geopolitics, you can be an empire or you can be a debtor, but you cannot be both. For 80 years, the United States defied this rule. They printed the money and the world accepted it. They sanctioned their enemies and the world obeyed. They were the masters of the universe, but this week, the master had to go begging. In Caracas, the United States is doing the unthinkable. After years of trying to destroy Nicolas Maduro, after seizing his planes, freezing his accounts, and putting a $15 million bounty on his head, Washington is suddenly desperate to make a deal. Why? Because the petrodollar is dying, and they need Venezuela's oil to save it. And in Washington, the new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is facing a nightmare. He needs to borrow $3 trillion this year just to keep the lights on, but his usual customers aren't buying. So, he is forced to look across the ocean to the very country the U.S. calls its greatest enemy, China. Do you see the irony? The United States is currently waging an economic war against the two countries that it needs the most. I worked at the IMF for many years. I have seen this pattern before. When a superpower starts begging its enemies for resources, it is not a 4D chess move. It is a liquidation sale. Today we are going to look at the two desperate deals happening behind closed doors. The oil deal in Venezuela and the debt deal with China. Because if either of these deals fails, the American economy does not just recession, it stops. Let us start with the humiliation in Caracas. If you want to understand how weak the American empire has become, you do not need to look at the GDP numbers. You just need to look at who they are shaking hands with. 5 years ago, the United States declared that Nicolas Maduro was not the president of Venezuela. They recognized a man named Juan Guaido. They froze Venezuela's bank accounts. They seized their airplanes. They even put a $15 million bounty on Maduro's head like he was a cowboy outlaw in a Western movie. The goal was simple: collapse the Venezuelan economy, force a regime change, and take control of the world's largest oil reserves. So, what happened? Maduro is still there, but the American oil strategy is dead. You see, the United States made a catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed that if they sanctioned Venezuelan oil, the world would stop buying it. But the world is hungry. China continued to buy. India continued to buy. And here is the detail that keeps the U.S. Treasury awake at night. They did not pay in dollars. Venezuela became the first laboratory for a post-dollar oil market. They started selling their oil for Chinese yuan and increasingly for USDT crypto. By sanctioning them, the U.S. forced Venezuela to build a financial immune system. They proved to the world that you can sell oil without Washington's permission. And now the tables have turned. While the U.S. has plenty of oil in Texas, it is the wrong kind of oil. It is light sweet crude. But the massive American refineries in the Gulf Coast, they were built 50 years ago to process heavy sour crude. Without that heavy oil, the refineries choke. They cannot produce enough diesel. And if diesel runs out, the American supply chain stops. So we see the unthinkable. American diplomats are quietly going back to Caracas. They are issuing waivers to companies like Chevron to pump oil in Venezuela again. They are offering debt relief. They are essentially begging the man they tried to overthrow to please turn the pumps back on. This is not diplomacy, this is surrender. It proves that when push comes to shove, the United States needs the Global South's resources more than the Global South needs the United States' permission. But if the situation in Venezuela is embarrassing, the situation in Washington is absolutely terrifying. While the diplomats are begging for oil, the Treasury is begging for cash. This is where the new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, finds himself in a trap. The American public thinks the Treasury Secretary's job is to manage the economy. It is not. His job is to be a salesman. Every single year, the U.S. government spends trillions more than it taxes. To fill that giant hole, they have to sell paper, U.S. Treasury bonds. For decades, this was the easiest job in the world. The entire planet lined up to buy American debt because it was considered risk-free. But this year, the math has broken. The United States needs to sell $3 trillion in new debt just to survive the next 12 months. And the question Mr. Bessent has to answer is, who is going to buy it? He looks at Japan, traditionally the biggest buyer. But Japan is in a currency crisis. They are not buying American debt. They are selling it to save their own yen. He looks at Europe. They are stagnant, fighting their own recession. He looks at the American banks. They are already stuffed full of government paper, sitting on unrealized losses. There is only one buyer left on the planet with deep enough pockets to bail out the United States, China. And this is the absolute comedy of the American position. On one hand, you have the politicians screaming about a trade war. You have threats of 60% tariffs. You have generals talking about conflict in the Pacific, but quietly behind closed doors,